Welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine who's been a friend for now 15, almost 20 years, a guy that I've worked with and respect and adore. And you're about to learn some incredible things about yourself. This is Dr. Daniel Amen, and I'll give you a little bit more information in a little bit about him. First, we're going to start with the three questions that we always start with, which is, Daniel, who are the three people, living or dead, that walked the earth that you strongly admire, and then the character traits of them?
Well, the first one was my grandfather, my mother's father, and he was the kindest person I've ever met. And he saw me, he was involved. I'm one of seven, and so I'm a middle child, so nobody really saw me or paid attention to me, and except him. And I was named after him. He was my best friend, and he was a candy maker. So it doesn't get much better than that to have, you know, a grandfather where my earliest memory is standing at the stove when I'm 4 making fudge. Now, it killed him early because of all the sugar, and so I actually make brain healthy chocolate bars to honor him, but also to live a long time so that I can see my grandchildren. So that's the first one. The second one's my dad, and he and I never got along until later in his life, where he became literally one of my best friends. But what I appreciated about him was hard work, very successful. He was chairman of the board of a $4 billion company, and he was authentic. And his favorite word was bullshit. And he would just say what he thought and just really didn't care if you liked him or not. And
the self-assured.
I came to appreciate the self-assured, yes, but also he was just authentic. You knew where you stood with him, which early in my life was, you know, never in a very good place, you know, looking back on it, despite the fact that I was a good kid. And then the third one is Lincoln. And, you know, I know I'm not alone in that, but I've loved Lincoln ever since I was a young adult, because he failed repeatedly and yet kept going. And he struggled with depression, was even suicidal twice in his life. And I think his suffering set him up to be able to be the president during the Civil War, that he knew how to manage darkness.
What's a character trait of someone who does that? How would you frame that?
You know, there's a resilience to it that I have just always admired. Plus, he loved humor. A lot of people don't know that about Lincoln, is he loved to laugh. He'd tell off-color jokes, and he was just one of the most resilient people who overcame a lot of trauma.
Anything else about him? Because he's one of my favorites too.
He surrounded himself with people who wouldn't tell him what he wanted to hear. So I really appreciated that about him. You know, and he was masterful with words, which is something that's always been important to me.
When I listen to the character traits of all of those people, that's a great insight to the character traits of you. And they are, because I know you well. And I know that you are resilient, you're savvy, you're incredibly compassionate, you love humor, and you're a great lover of life and other people. And there's a lot of all of those people in some form or fashion you've described have a core root in empathy. And I think that you're one of those people in my life that I know has a core root in empathy. And for those that are just enrolling in this conversation, I'm talking to Dr. Daniel Amen, and Dr. Amen is one of the preeminent brain scientists in the world. And I've had the good fortune of knowing him for years and working with him. And he is one of the most prolific authors in the space. And I reference him in my own books. He's someone who knows about as much of the human mind and brain and how the physical connection of the brain and the emotional tethers of the mind interconnect, and brain health and emotions and depression and all of the things that we associate with our brain, and overcoming and healing our brains. He, in fact, was the steward of the NFL study for brain damage in athletes in the NFL for a number of years, and it is well regarded in the space as being the guy. So thank you for being here. Tell me a little bit about this journey from your perspective and where you guys are today.
Just in a paragraph, as I said, I'm one of 7. Growing up, my dad called me a maverick, and to him, that was not a good thing. Although I learned later he was a maverick, considered a maverick in his industry. He's a grocer. And when I was 18, Vietnam was still going on, and I had a low draft number, became an infantry medic, where my love of medicine was born. But about a year into it, I realized I didn't like being shot at. Just wasn't for me. Some people like it, I don't. And I got myself retrained as an X-ray technician and developed a passion for medical imaging. So our professors used to say, how do you know unless you look? And I got out of the Army, went to college, medical school. And when I'm a second-year medical student, someone I love tries to kill herself. It was the first time I'd ever been around someone who was suicidal. Took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and very quickly I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her, that ultimately it would help her children and even her grandchildren, as they would be shaped by someone who was happier and more stable. So this is 42 years ago. I fell in love with psychiatry because I realized it could change generations of people, and I've loved it every day since. But I fell in love with the only medical specialty that virtually never looks at the organ it treats. And I knew it was wrong, and I knew it would change. I just had no idea I'd be part of the change. And when I got the opportunity to start looking at the brain in the late 1980s, it just changed everything I did professionally and personally, because I fell in love with my own brain. And so I've spent now over 30 years helping people have better brains and better lives. And we've built the world's largest database of brain scans related to behavior. We have 170,000 scans on patients from 150 countries. I now have 9 clinics across the country. We have a brand new one in Dallas, which is just screaming busy. So Texas has been very good to us. And we love our work. We've seen little kids and old people. And
talk a little bit about a SPECT scan, because a lot of people won't know what that is. So if you could describe how that's maybe different than what people anticipate when they think of looking at a brain.
So, we do a couple of different studies, but the primary one we do is called SPECT, SPECT, which stands for single photon emission computed tomography. So the computed tomography is CT. So a lot of people have heard of CT scans, but rather than it be an anatomical study, this is a functional study. It's a nuclear medicine study that looks at blood flow and activity. And it basically shows us 3 things: good activity, too little, or too much. And then our job is to balance it. So you referenced the NFL study. We've now scanned and treated 300 NFL players and some really cool players like Terry Bradshaw and Freddie Dryer and Jack Youngblood and Eric Dickerson. high levels of damage, which means we see overall lower activity in their brain, but also the possibility for recovery for about 80% of them if they do the things we ask them to do.
Let's talk about some of those in the context of a lot of folks who are watching this, and this probably relates to your new book as well, they're living through COVID. They're in a new world where there's a ton of stressors in their world, and maybe their diets changed, stress has changed, their routines have changed, their exercise patterns have changed. Share a little bit about the current dilemmas as you see them, and what people should be thinking about.
So you have a historic opportunity to get well because you don't have to travel in traffic anymore, that you have more time with your children. And it depends on where you bring your attention. And so I was actually finishing my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening, right as the pandemic started. And so there's a lot of pandemic stress in this book. Depression has tripled since last March, 2020. And I remember the pandemic started for me March 10th, 2020, when my other new book, The End of Mental Illness, had just come out. And I was going to be on the Mel Robbins show. We'd scanned her. It's a nationally syndicated television show. And I was in my bathroom getting ready to go to the airport when her producer called me and said, "Don't come. We're closing the studio." And I remember that night writing down this phrase: mental hygiene is just as important as washing your hands. We need to disinfect our thoughts, tame the dragons. That's the analogy in the new book. And then I wrote down these two words, pandemic squared, that this pandemic, because of the isolation, the fear, is going to trigger a mental health pandemic, which clearly it has. And we need to discipline our minds so that we can manage what's happening. So for example, Tana and I teach something called positivity bias training, is that we start every day with, today is going to be a great day. And then it just sets it up for, well, what's going to be right about the day. I knew you're on my schedule. We've been friends for a long time. That made me happy. When I go to bed at night, I go, what went well today? And I've actually done that for years. It's my favorite part of the day. It's sort of weird, right? You're going to sleep. Just looking for all the moments and micro moments, those little tiny moments that made me happy. So it's like a treasure hunt. And that way I'm nudging my mind. I also turn off the news. In fact, I have an app that I start. It's called the Good News Network. It's just mostly, it's uplifting, positive, inspiring stories, pictures, things like that. Because the news is no longer the news. The news is hysteria. The news
it's a sales pitch from whoever's pitching it. It's a sales pitch for sure.
Yeah, and it's damaging the minds. And and if you're not eating right and you're drinking a lot, bad for your brain. I
think the alcohol consumption and drug consumption has gone through the roof during COVID.
It certainly has. And I think most of it's because people don't know how to manage their mind. And so they're medicating their mind and not managing it. And the problem is, once you start alcohol to manage your mind, you're not going to stop. Or once you start a benzo because your anxiety, odds are you're not going to stop. And so doing the right thing is ultimately because you love yourself. And there are ways to manage your mind so it doesn't manage you.
One of the things that I think you and I talked about early on in our relationship was health and sleep and alcohol and how all of these things are independent. And you kind of taught me a little bit of a regimen. And one was backing off of alcohol. And I'd be lying to say, if you know me well, that that I'm not entirely backed off of alcohol, but I don't drink daily. I drink socially. But aside from that, was this idea of one, getting to a place where you're realizing that your sleep and your bed is so important. And your routine that you gave me years ago that I still use and I teach in courses that I teach is writing my problems down on a pad before I go to bed so they're on paper and I can sleep without obsessing about the negative parts of the day. Then I crash out. I sleep really solidly and without alcohol, because alcohol make you wake up 3 or 4 hours after you sleep and you get no good sleep. So I get about 5 or 6 really good hours of sleep. And then I naturally wake up at 4 a.m. and I pick my list up and I make my list of the things I want to do and accomplish that day. And I kind of meditate on those and I drift back off, get another 90 minutes of sleep. And then I get up and I do my stuff. And the other piece that you're really big on is supplementation and vitamins to make sure that your brain has what it needs because it's running this whole operating system. Did I do that right? Am I still doing the right thing?
You are. You know, I've become more sophisticated over the years, which means I've made it even simpler. You ask yourself this question every day: is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that with information and love, you just start doing the right things. I've created a mnemonic I like a lot called Bright Minds. You want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed to the dark place. You have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind, and we know what they are. So, for example, in Bright Minds, B is for blood flow. Low blood flow is the #1 brain imaging predictor of Alzheimer's disease. Whatever you can do to increase blood flow. So exercise, eating foods like beets and cayenne pepper, supplements like ginkgo can really help. R is retirement and aging. The older you get, the more serious you need to be because, you know, as we age, our skin falls off our face. That same process is happening in the brain. And so being, you know, it's why, you know, I just went for an 1.5-hour walk around Balboa Island because, you know, I need to do that. I is inflammation. It is just rampant and everywhere. And people heard about inflammation because of COVID can cause your body to start producing chemicals to attack itself. So lowering inflammation is important. Omega-3 fatty acids, taking care of your gums, critical. It's a critical cause of inflammation. And killing the processed food, because that causes inflammation. The G is genetics, but people get genetics wrong. They go, oh, well, I have Alzheimer's in my family, I'm screwed. And it's no, genes load the gun. It's our behavior that pulls the trigger. So genes will tell you what you're vulnerable to. I'm vulnerable to obesity and heart disease. I'm not obese and I don't have heart disease. Why? Because I'm always working on preventing them. H is for head trauma, a major cause of psychiatric problems nobody knows about. T is toxins, why I'm not a fan of marijuana or alcohol, because they're toxic to your brain. And, you know, do you have mental health issues, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia? All of them prematurely age the brain. And so making sure you get them treated early and effectively. The second I is immunity and infections. Oh my goodness, COVID-19 attacks the brain. 20% of people who get COVID-19 end up with mental health symptoms or cognitive impairment. We knew that early on, that you lose your sense of taste and smell. Well, that means it's affecting your nervous system, because your nervous system is what tastes and smells. And I'm collecting COVID brains, and I have a number of them. And it's actually surprised me a little bit.
Wait a minute. What does that mean? You're collecting COVID brains. Tell me about that.
Scans of people where they had COVID, but also if I had their brain before they got COVID and after. And what usually happens close to an infection is your brain gets pretty pissed off and it becomes overactive. And that's what we're seeing chronically. If you don't do a good job of mopping it up, then it can actually cause damage to your brain. So you want to be serious. This is not a joke. A lot of people say, it's a joke, it's the flu. It's not. It's much worse. And it can damage your brain. So
And it's a virus. It doesn't leave the body ever, does it? Once it's in your body, it's kind of in there, isn't it? Aren't most viruses kind of that way?
It can become dormant. It can become managed, if you will. But, if you just think of herpes or Lyme disease, a lot of people had Lyme and it's not really impacting them because their immune system's taking care of it. And a lot of people with COVID, their immune system's taking care of it, but vulnerable people, and we actually don't know really who's vulnerable, because COVID is like a dirty bomb in the sense that when you get infected with it, it gets into your bloodstream, and then it produces all sorts of proteins that your immune system sees as foreign subjects, and it goes attacks all these different proteins. And for some people, it's like friendly fire. It causes an autoimmune response, and people can get really sick. There's this thing called long COVID or long haulers syndrome. Right. I actually know people who have that. And it's not a good thing. I think all of us, and I've said this since the beginning of the pandemic, your best defense against COVID is your brain making good decisions and your immune system. And so keeping it strong and healthy, vitamin C, omega-3 fatty acids, many different mushroom strains can do it. We make a new product called Smart Mushrooms. I like a lot. It's got 5 mushrooms in it that help boost cognitive ability and immunity. You should see the shake I make in the morning. It's got the mushrooms and vitamin C and omega-3 fatty acids. And
these mushrooms have properties that stay in the body. So it's almost like taking a supplement that you want to keep that level up. Is that right?
Correct. And it really helps your gut health be stronger. And, it's another big thing I learned under immunity and infections. I often talk about, under inflammation, I talk about the health of your gut.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because there's a lot of research and a lot of talk now about the gut-brain connection and this communication network between the two of them.
Let me finish the Bright Minds and then we'll do that.
Yep.
The N in Bright Minds is neurohormone disorders. And so making sure your testosterone, your thyroid, your estrogen and progesterone for women are optimal, critical. D is diabesity, being overweight or having high blood sugar, damaging to the brain. And S is sleep, like you talked about. The gut-brain connection is just so stinking interesting. It, when I was in psychiatry school and medical school, nobody ever talked about it. But in the last 15 years or so, people are beginning to realize they're intimately connected with each other. And we have a gut lining that when it gets leaky, actually lets foreign bodies into your bloodstream, and that can cause an autoimmune disorders. If your microbiome, what's that? The 100 trillion bugs you have in your gut, bacteria, viruses, fungi, they're important to you. It's sort of like it's your own city of these bugs that help with digestion, that make neurotransmitters, that are part of your immune system, that if the gut bugs aren't healthy, say you have too many of the troublemakers, like in a population, you're going to end up with rioting and your body will become very unhealthy. It's why probiotics can be helpful, why eating right is critical, while avoiding pesticides. What do pesticides kill? Bugs. And you don't want to be eating foods with pesticides because it's damaging your own microbiome.
When you take what do you, not an anti-inflammatory, but the word I'm looking for, antibiotic. You can do a lot of damage to your existing, kill a lot of the good with a lot of bad when you get on antibiotics. If you have a patient that goes through that, when they come out the other side of getting off the antibiotic, how do you kind of get them, what do you recommend people do to reboot? And not getting medical advice here, but what's a generic thing that people should be looking for to make sure that their gut biome is functional?
Well, I mean, your diet's obviously the most important thing, is eating clean food, healthy food, prebiotics, just think fiber, foods loaded with fiber. And then taking probiotics can be helpful. And, you know, I'm not a fan of detoxing. I'm a fan of always detoxing. I'm a fan of not eating toxic things, right? Way more than, oh, I'm going to go on a 2-week detox and then go back to eating like crap. I have this fun story. You know, I've been on public television a lot. We've just finished filming our 15th public television special. And often when they're released, not this time, but I'll go around to stations and raise money for them.
Right.
And I was in Houston.
You're like the #1 guy on Sunday night for PBS around the world, I think. You have been forever.
Well, I was in Houston, and Eddie, the guy I pledge with, and I'd been with him a number of times, and I'm like, Eddie, you look great. What happened? Well, he went on this special diet, and it's where he gets a pregnancy hormone every day for like 21 days, only eats 500 calories a day, and lost a ton of weight. And I'm
like progesterone?
No, I'm blocking on the name. Oh, I'll think about it in a second.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I don't really like that diet. And I went, well, congratulations. And he said, no lie. He said, I'm so excited about this. And as a way to celebrate the weight loss, I ordered 2 deep dish pizzas from my favorite pizza place in Chicago. And then I gave him this look, and he's like, what? I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I can't think of one thing dumber. Yeah. It's like you went to rehab.
Yeah, and you're celebrating with a bottle of Jack Daniels.
Celebrated by getting drunk.
But that's how our minds work that way. When we, you know, we feel like we're depriving ourselves. When we set ourselves up in that framework of, oh, this is deprivation, then we get through that moment. We go, oh, I now need to have that. But if you can change the frame that you approach that with and go, no, this is actually nourishment, doing it the right way, which you guys have been really good. I've been watching you guys for years, and you and Tanner are both brilliant at that. You walk your talk.
You know Drew Carey, the actor who lost a whole bunch of weight. And he just said it in the most brilliant way. He said, eating crappy food isn't a reward. It's a punishment. And then I'm like, oh, he gets it. You only want to love food that loves you back. Otherwise, you're in a bad relationship with food. Remember when I did this big project at Saddleback Church? We did the Daniel plan.
Warren.
Yeah. And one of the pastor's wives came to see me after we started the program. And I was actually just like this, drinking tea. And she said, could you put the tea down?
The forced perspective of the camera, by the way, makes that tea look like it's a swimming pool. The teacup's larger than you.
She said, can you put the tea down? And I thought that was so weird. But I put it down because, you know, generally I'm a nice person. And she said, I didn't want you to spit it at me. And I'm like, oh my. She said, for what I'm about to tell you, she said, after you lectured at the church, I told my husband I'd rather get Alzheimer's disease than give up sugar. And I just looked at her and I said, did you date the bad boys in high school? I said, because you're in a bad relationship. You're in a relationship with something you love that hates you, that will give you dementia if you're not thoughtful and careful. And ultimately, she stopped and she realized how dumb that statement was. But so many people have a bad relationship with either food or alcohol. And, Tana and I have a podcast called The Brain Warrior's Way. And in our book, The Brain Warrior's Way, we talk about the weapons of mass destruction. And the real weapons of mass destruction are highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber, food-like substances stored in plastic containers. It's basically the American food system, where 72% of us are overweight, 42% of us are obese. And it's a major cause of diabetes, depression.
And we're exporting this globally. We're teaching the whole world how to eat this way.
And what we're learning, I published a study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease that showed as your weight goes up, it's on 35,000 scans, as your weight goes up, the actual physical size and function of the brain goes down. And the editor of the journal loves my paper. And he said, people don't get it. Alzheimer's is a lifestyle disease. It's not a genetic disease. It's a lifestyle disease. And if that is true, then we can get serious about prevention.
Now, amyloid plaques play a role in this, in Alzheimer's. Is that correct?
It's actually, people are not believing that anymore.
Okay.
In fact, the same editor, who's not very far from you, he's at the University of Texas, San Antonio, that he said the amyloid hypothesis is dead. Okay. Amyloid is actually a protective protein. And we think it is protecting the brain against inflammation or from infection. And another thing people don't know, that infectious diseases like Lyme disease is a major cause of Alzheimer's disease. And when the brain's blood-brain barrier, sort of like we talked about leaky gut, you can also get leaky brain. So when bad things get into your brain, it produces the amyloid protein as a way to protect neurons, but the buildup of it tends to damage them over time.
Okay, so that makes sense. As you do more torture to your brain, it's building a cast around it, and pretty soon the cast makes it an unmovable object. I get it.
Correct.
So reversing that process, or protecting against it, are there any key takeaways that people should have? Then I'm gonna go into some spaces after that are kind of unusual for us, I think. But
well, I wrote a book called Memory Rescue, and it's knowing which of the Bright Minds risk factors you have and preventing or treating them. So for all of our patients, I think in the last 5 years, we write down which of the Bright Minds risk factors they have. And if we don't know, we go look for them. And then what are we going to do to either treat it or prevent it?
Remember you being one of the first people I've ever heard say, your thoughts are just thoughts. They're not true. And if you listen to them, you'll repeat them. And if you repeat them and listen to them over and over enough, they become a pattern of behavior. They become expressed in your life. How do you see that relating to the current situation politically in the world, in COVID, in this time of high stress for folks, of just getting your thinking clearer, making choices?
Thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to behavior. Behavior leads to success or failure. It starts with your thoughts. Every time you have a thought, your brain releases chemicals, every single time. Negative, angry, divisive, hateful, hopeless thoughts. Your body responds to every single one of them. And Washington is the worst example for our children, either side. I'm an equal opportunity hater. Either side, they distort things to make them out to be worse than they really are. It's all about blame and shame and guilt, and it's awful. Positive thoughts, happy thoughts, hopeful thoughts, your brain actually works better. Now, I'm not a fan of positive pie in the sky thinking. I'm a fan of accurate thinking, because low levels of anxiety cause you to die early from accidents and preventable illnesses. So I want people to have enough anxiety that they do the right thing, but too much will obviously damage you. And that's why you have to turn off the news, because the news is bent toward negativity. If it bleeds, it leads, because they're trying to make money for their advertisers, and people pay attention to things that frighten them. That's an evolutionary thing that we don't need anymore, but it's still there. And so I talk about killing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. And here's the exercise. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking and just ask yourself if it's true. It came out recently that I've been Justin Bieber's doctor and Miley Cyrus's doctor. And I'm blessed. Jenny Garth and I just did a series of videos we posted, and I adore her. But no matter if you're famous, no matter if you have a ton of money, they still had all the negative thoughts, like, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not enough, which is sort of silly, right? But they never were taught on how to not believe every stupid thing they think.
Yeah.
And so again, it goes to managing your mind so it doesn't manage you. And one thing you and I've never talked about, but I have a technique I love. I stole it from my friend Stephen Hayes. Give your mind a name. That when we teach people how to distance themselves from the chatter in their head, they just do better. And so I gave my mind the name Hermie. Hermie was my pet raccoon when I was 16, and I loved her, but she talked, and God knows what she ever said. And so I can just, if my mind is bothering me, periodically it'll just hold up my failures, like right in front of my face. It's like, oh, you saw this person, they didn't get better, or you did this book and it didn't do well. So my mind will just do that. And I'm like, Hermie, I'm just going to go put you in the cage. It's like, this is not helpful, and I'm not going to tolerate this today.
I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. And it's getting one in finding value in your failures too. They're the things that you push off from in life, but you don't dwell on them. You go, okay, that's some friction, and I can push off of that friction. That happened. And I have somebody who's really close to me that was, and someone I care about a lot, and they have depressing thoughts, and they're an older person. And they said to me, well, this might not be true for you, but absolutely everything that's ever gone wrong in my life was 100% my fault. And I thought, well, that's kind of rough. That's kind of a heavy anvil to carry through your life. Isn't there a little bit of, shit happens sometimes in life, that everything that went wrong in your life,
like grace and forgiveness.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people that carry that kind of angst with them. That, yeah, it's great to say you're in control of your life, but I think that you're in control, like being equipped. I'm well enough equipped so that when things go wrong, I can deal with them. That doesn't mean I created everything that surrounds me. So
some people are attached to their thoughts, and I can teach them to detach from them, but they have to sort of want to be better.
Yeah.
And, I had
There's a little bit of Byron Katie in that, who you introduced me to in that thinking of, is it true?
You know, it was actually first developed by, wow, the Stoics would talk about it thousands of years ago, about managing your mind. Byron Katie, who I love, wrote a book called Loving What Is. And it's just so smart that she makes it so simple. And it's basically, whenever you suffer, write down the belief, everything that's ever gone wrong is my fault, and write it down. And then ask yourself 5 simple questions. Is it true? Is it absolutely true with 100% certainty? You're a complete victim of you. How do you feel when you believe the thought, awful, depressed? Who would you be without the thought, free? But my favorite part of it is to take the original thought that bothers you, everything I've ever done wrong is my fault 100%, and turn it to the opposite. Everything I've ever done wrong is not all my fault. Or everything I've done right is because of me. And just these questions are meditations. And Your Brain is Always Listening, I actually start the book with a story of the son of the Mexican mafia. And I met him after he got out of UCI's psychiatric ward because he was suicidal. And he was loaded with trauma and loaded. I mean, you know, it's one of his earliest memories. He's laying on his dad's chest and 12 SWAT officers break their home door and have their rifles pointed at him. So this boy is loaded with trauma, and his negative thoughts were just out of control. Within 6 months, he had them under control. I mean, how exciting is that? Even though he grew up with a lot of trauma, by balancing his brain and helping him with his mind, his relationships, you can heal. But you have to be willing to at least question. If you're not willing, then, you know, you're going to keep the rock around your neck.
Trauma is, and it comes up in a lot of these conversations that I have these days, really becoming a focus of a dialogue in raising the vibration of humanity in general. I hear a lot of people talking about trauma and how to get out of trauma. And I'm sure there's many, many paths. One of the things that's become kind of pop, and I'm not saying I agree with it or don't, I'm curious what your thoughts are, is there's lots of therapies that almost fall back to Timothy Leary, that are MDMA therapies or LSD therapies, and things that are supposed to be these kind of magic bullet 2 to 5 session things where you have this, I'll say, light drug experience. And I have not done this myself, that untethers and unwires these thoughts and emotions and allows you to reconstruct. What's your take on that?
Well, in the book, there's 13 dragons from the past, and one of them is the wounded dragon. So we take trauma on a lot in this book. And I'm a huge fan of writing down the story of what happened from an adult's perspective, of a treatment called EMDR. There are other ones like tapping and havening that can help. And so I like to do those first before we go to magic mushrooms. But for some people who've done that work and it wasn't helpful, short courses of ketamine or magic mushrooms seem to be helpful. Just legalized in Oregon. And so a number of our patients have gone. I can't say it's highly effective, but for some people it seems to be very helpful. So like ketamine was a street drug, and it's an animal anesthetic. I think out of the people I've sent for it, maybe 10% get that miracle cure that people think about. It's still like to have a healthy body it's sort of work over time. The same thing's true with our minds, that it needs to be work over time. I need to work on the physical functioning of my brain, how my thoughts are, the dragons from the past. I need to work on my relationships. And I always should be working on my sense of meaning and purpose. So we always think of biological, psychological, social, and spiritual circles. Spiritual being, why the heck do I care?
You find yourself still having these moments. I mean, we all have a meter in us, and you do this for a living, and people will have the expectation, well, he's the doctor, he's got himself cured for sure. And there's got to be, right?
50% of doctors are struggling with burning. Now I feel really great most of the time. I have a wife that I adore. I have work I love. I have 5 grandchildren. I have a lot of good things in my life. But, for many years, I've taken intense criticism from colleagues. But nobody has it all together. If you think somebody has it all together, what it means is you don't know them. That normal is a myth. We're all sort of struggling. And oh, by the way, we're all dying. So one of the dragons from the past is the death dragon. And, you have to wrestle with that sucker every day. Is what I'm doing today, does it have meaning and purpose? Is there a good reason why I am breathing? So
one of the exercises we go through in our courses and stuff is recognizing that we are going to die, because there's a lot of people that suppress that dialogue in themselves 100%, and they put themselves in routines that are Sunday football, Monday night football, Tuesday bunko, Wednesday bowling night, Thursday, and they have these routines that are generally maybe not healthy because they lead to foods and behaviors that aren't healthy, and they do these things to exhibit a pattern of immortality, because this is what we do every Monday. Monday's coming. This is what we do. And they don't have pattern breaks in their life. And then somebody they know dies. And the first question they ask is, how did they die? Go, well, he was in a motorcycle accident. Go, well, I don't ride a motorcycle. Back to my routine. And they forget to live. And so in your life, you're a busy person. I mean, it's very hard for us to even connect sometimes because you're so busy and I'm so busy. But what do you do in your quote unquote downtime when you want to turn off the world and have some time for Daniel and Tana, or even just Daniel? What do you do?
What do I do? I'm pretty routine in that, and Tana's, I think she's done it on purpose. She figured out how to make this incredibly delicious, healthy cappuccino. And one day she was going to travel, and I'm like, who's going to make the cappuccino? This is literally 5 years ago. And she goes, look, it's not that hard. You went to medical school. You can figure this out. So she showed me. And then for the last 5 years, I make it better than her. And so I get up, do that for her. We just sit and chat for a half an hour. And then, I go off to work. But I do my meetings walking generally. Sort of, I hate Zoom for that reason. I have huddles in the morning for about 40 minutes. And that's when I'm exercising and walking. And I love movies, but it's mostly, I'm one of 7, so I don't really need alone time. I just happen to live with my best friend. This is what I recommend. If you're thinking of asking somebody to marry you, ask yourself, can I live with them in a pandemic where I don't get to play golf and all I am with that person? Do I like them that much? And thankfully, I do that. And I listen to books. I love books like Pillars of the Earth. I think that's my favorite book by Ken Follett. And I like watching great movies. And I love creating. If I didn't get paid to write, I'd still write.
Right.
It's thinking about the dragons that breathe fire on your emotional brain. and we have a new quiz. People can find out their dragon called knowyourdragons.com. I love creating and sharing what I learn. I think that's always, my primary dragon is the abandoned, invisible, or insignificant dragon, just because of my birth order. And, I find significance.
It's funny because you're one of the most significant people I've ever met. And obviously I keep coming back to you as a friend year after year because you're a really important person on the planet Earth, and you help a lot of people. You're the book that's behind you, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. Absolutely everybody should read. If you tied up, your brain is always listening. What's the benefit for the audience? Because I think having people read your work is really, there's things that are like self-help that I don't understand. This is self-knowledge and self-awareness. Your work is at a completely different level. So your brain's always listening. What am I going to get from that?
Well, it's divided into 5 sections. And the first section is about the dragons from the past. So your brain is always listening to what happened before and what you project into the future. And in part 1, your brain is always listening to the dragons from the past. So which of the 13 dragons do you have? And the most interesting of all of the dragons is the ancestral dragon, where the issues are actually not your issues. They belong to your mom, or they belong to your grandfather. Part 2 is the they, them, and other dragons. Your brain is always listening to your parents, whether they're alive or dead, your siblings, your children, your teachers and coaches, and the mean girls, and popular kids that you knew, societal dragons, internet troll dragons. Part 3 is the bad habit dragons. It's the habits we get into every day that may be hurting us. And the worst of the bad habit dragons is the oblivious dragon, where you never read food labels, you don't know about the products you put on your body. And that's why we're fat and sick as a society. We have a lot of bad habits. And then there's a part on the addicted dragons. I have a brand new 12-step program. Like AA was built 85 years ago. It has no neuroscience. It's like, let's take the best of it, but add brain health to it. So that's cool.
Well, that sounds like a whole nother book right there.
You'll meet the craving dragon, and that could be a whole book. And then there's a whole section on the scheming dragons. We've talked about some of them, whether it's the newsmonger dragons or the food pusher dragons or the holiday dragons, oh, it's Valentine's Day, that I can splurge, or it's Easter, or it's Christmas or Thanksgiving. And it's like, why do you give yourself, why do you celebrate Christ's birth by hurting yourself? It's like, how does that make any sense? And it'll teach you about the influences on your brain and how you can be the one that decides what goes in, because what goes in determines what comes out.
Wow. Well, thank you for spending this time with us. I know that you're super busy, and don't hang up right away, because I want to have that other conversation with you. But I want to sign off for our folks and pick up Daniel Amen's new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. And you probably are, this is probably on Amazon, right?
Absolutely.
So it means when you order on Amazon, you'll see his other books underneath there. And he's got about 23 other books. Is that about right? 24?
I think this is 42 for me.
Oh, good night.
Just because I'm old.
Oh, you're busy
for a long time.
You're a busy guy. So, but there's other great titles there. So put a few other ones in your cart, because you will not regret learning about yourself. And that's what this is learning about your own operating and your own emotional system so that you can manage it better, which is critical for all of us. So Dr. Daniel Amen, thank you so much for this time. I'm now going online, because this probably is the only book that you have that I don't own. And I'm going to order it, and I appreciate you.
Thanks. And if they go to yourbrainisalwayslistening.com and put in their receipt from pre-ordering it, they actually get 4 free gifts, including a coupon for a free bottle of Happy Saffron, which is my favorite supplement ever. 21 randomized controlled trials with saffron and mood. And I'm just really excited. So
you're just mad about saffron?
I love saffron.
That's awesome. Okay, we'll do that. And in the interim, thank you. I look forward to it. I look forward to more people discovering you and your work and your brilliance and your kindness. Thanks.
Thanks, my friend.
All right.